Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Coip. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities and the Vice President of Urban Initiatives at APLU. And I am extremely pleased to welcome you all here to what is the second installation of USU's new webinar series. And this one is pretty self-explanatory from its title. Student engagement at USU institutions, what can we learn from NSSE? And I have been friends and professional colleagues with Jillian Kinzie and worked very closely with colleagues at NSSE over the years, and began to look at the fact that over 30 of our member institutions at USU have participated in NSSE with some regularity over the past 5 years. And I think 28 of them have participated in the past 2 years, meaning that you're all on a pretty regular cycle and rely upon these data. But as Jillian and I were speaking, we realized we hadn't really done any aggregate work where we took a look at what the data were telling us about USU institutions in aggregate. And that's interesting because, as we all know, there is a unique element to being an urban serving university, and truly urban serving and not just urban located, which is really the binding force between most of our members, is that it's not just that we have an urban zip code, but that you are in your mission, in the people you serve, in the connections that you make, in the collaboration with the community, you are truly urban serving. And so this is a chance for Jillian Kinzie to speak to us using the data that you all have provided at your institutions. I'm also pleased to welcome Kristen Pretty and Cheyenne Smith, who are graduate assistants working with Jillian. She will speak more, but they also have been helping mine these data and working to put together this portrait. And this is an exciting opportunity for us to take a look at these data and maybe consider how we can continue this collaboration between USU and NSSE to go forward to better understand and articulate what experiences are uniquely happening at urban serving universities. Jillian Kinzie, many of you know her, have seen her speak, have her books on your bookshelf, but I have to at least do the honor of wrapping her up a little bit. She is the Associate Director of the Indiana University Center for Postsecondary Research, which is the home of the National Survey of Student Engagement, or the NSSE, as well as some other corollary surveys such as the BESE, and the FESE. So there are all sorts of SE family of surveys. She also serves as a senior scholar with the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, or NILOA. She is one of the greatest minds I've ever had the joy of collaborating with, and truly is an advocate for urban serving universities. Many of you may recognize her from the summer meeting where NSSE and Jillian were sponsors and engaged in that meeting. So I'm going to turn it over without further ado to Jillian to share with you the real meat of our time together, these data, and how we can use them to better understand our sector and elevate it. So thank you, Jillian, for being here. Thank you, Kristen and Cheyenne, for your work. And I look forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jennifer. I really appreciate being with you. And Julia, thank you for running the show here and making sure we stay on track. And thanks everybody else for being here. I know this is time for you to that you could be spending elsewhere, and I am grateful for your thought leadership and your involvement in this project. And I should begin with thanking you for participating in the National Survey of Student Engagement for so long. So I'm grateful for that. We couldn't do our work without your participation. This really is a public serving project. And so I think in some ways I feel a kindred spirit in the public institutions that are urban serving, is we are a very user and project oriented kind of activity here. So we really do want to serve, I think, students in a similar way that you do. So with that, I also, again, want to acknowledge Kristen and Cheyenne, who are joined here today. And just one quick thing, Kristen is a full-time staff member at NSSE, so we're grateful for that. And Cheyenne is a brand new graduate student, so at least brand new to us graduate students, so we're really happy that she's with us. So I'm going to do a little sharing of slides, and no surprise here, there are slides, of course. But I hope we can actively use chat to post some questions and to really do a little bit of work along the way as maybe a comment occurs to you, or if there's something that you want to make sure we address as we go. So I hope you can keep chat open and can at least do a little bit of multitasking here. At least the things I'm inviting you to multitask on is listening and chatting at the same time. So As Jennifer indicated, we have been partnering on other projects over the years, really to mine the assessment and improvement angle for a very long time. And when she started working with the urban serving universities at APLU, it really became yet another opportunity to think about how we can access data from institutions from a variety of different projects to help us improve the quality of the undergraduate experience. I think that's a common goal, a common desire, and a common interest that we share. And USU is just one other dimension and sector to really think about how this work can apply and what brings us together here today. So I am happy to be engaging in this deeper dive. And to be honest, it's a sector that I hadn't really thought that much about. I will admit that I know it exists as a graduate of an urban serving institution myself. It's one that I value and really understand the mission of. But as a sector, I think there's some important connection and demonstration of its value that could be done. And I guess what intrigues me about this project is how NSSE might be a resource for you to help in that way in the story you want to tell about your work. So just I'm sure most of you are familiar with NSSE and what it is, but we're a 25-year-old project now, and I think that both conveys both strengths as an initiative, but also could seem like it's time for a kind of a resurgence or a refresh on this idea. And with a new director, I should acknowledge our new director, Leonard Taylor, who came to IU now he's been with us about a year working on the project, and I think he promises a really fresh perspective on this work. So I'm really happy about the direction that he's leading us. And the whole idea of NSSE providing institutions diagnostic, actionable data to inform improvement is still true. And I think we're going to get a lot more refined and moving forward in terms of really helping institutions make use of the data they have for institutional transformation. NSSE's got a rich resource or database of data. I mean, there's 6 million students surveyed. I feel like a McDonald's big sign here, and about 600 accounts of NSSE data-informed institutional action. So I'd like to pair this with we're not just a survey collection mechanism. We are really trying to inspire and catalyze and help chronicle the accounts of data-informed institutional action that results from understanding more about student engagement. Now, I think the urban serving universities, as I indicated, have a mission that's very compatible with what we're trying to foster. And for me, what's on APLU's website in terms of what the urban serving institution sector represents and what it is what it means to implement transformative change is really right in our wheelhouse as well. So to kind of get right into it, I kind of have staged this presentation in three big chunks. We passed, well, the prelude, and now we're in the first chunk, which is trying to describe a little bit more about USU participation and the landscape in NSSE. 25 years is a long time. There's a lot of history. I think that's worth knowing. So this just is a graph that represents the current USU member institutions' participation in NSSE over time. So each institution is represented on here as a mark in one of these bars for over time participation. So I'm going to go through a little bit more about the landscape of participation, and then I'm going to shift into what we see in some of the data that is salient, I think, for USU mission. And then we'll kind of close out with I hope, some forward-looking ideas about what we might do with all this information. There's a lot of information here, I'll just say. And Cheyenne and I should acknowledge Jayla, who is also helping us, and Kristen have really been working this with us. I think one thing I just want to point out is, we've got kind of early data in NSSE in the early years, 2000 to 2012, and then we have what we call the NSSE 2.0 or the NSSE refresh that was done in 2013 forward. That's pretty different, but this is still a nice pattern of participation over time, both prior to 2013 and since 2013. Now, on many of these slides, you're going to see this little yellow think bubble kind of pop up. And, if this didn't occur to you, I want to put a thought into your head here. So perhaps this is a subtle way to influence your thinking. I hope what this graph suggests to you is, when should we be surveying? Why are some surveying? Why are some people why was there such a boost in 2011? What was happening in 2018 that 21 institutions all did NSSE at the same time? What was happening in 2022? Well, we know what was happening in 2022 to cause that drop. So I think this whole idea of some questions that I hope this gets you to think about are things that we can take up in the chat or have a discussion about at the end or really any time. So a little more details, getting a little deeper. There are some institutions that I would consider really are regular participants, 10 or more times. I see my friend Lowell Davis is on from UT Arlington, 20 time. I don't know if there's a smoking jacket we give you like they give hosts on Saturday Night Live, but this is a lot of evidence of nice participation in NSSE. We have two USU member institutions currently that have never participated, and there's good reason for that. So I don't mean to call them out, but I do mean it to point out that there are at least two that have never participated for reasons that we can look at and explain um, uh, by just their own affiliations. Now, if you're not sure if you've participated, I'll invite you to go to our website. There's a nice, right off our homepage, this nse.indiana.edu, there is a search participating history page that you can go to and see your full array. And I'll just give you a picture of what that looks like for two institutions. I saw Janet was on from Northridge. And, the participation history, I think, is illuminating in and of itself. So I showed you the pooled administration history, but now you can look at your own institution. When you participated in NSSE, what topical modules were chosen, and then if you've ever done the faculty survey, our other SE, or the beginning college survey, the BESSE. So you can see this on your own just via that search page. Thank you, Kristen, for putting that in the chat. And, as Jennifer mentioned, we've got good coverage in recent years from 23 and 24 at 14 institutions each year. You kind of divided yourselves nicely across that. I think there might be a repeat in there, but that's pretty good representation. And the most interesting thing, and this just astounded me when Kristen told me this, it represents 39,000 students. This is not a small data set we're talking about here for just 23 and 24 alone. So we've got some, I think, really valuable and perhaps novel data about students at USU institutions over the last 2 years. So I think that's quite interesting. Okay, again, I hope this doesn't, my little yellow think bubble here doesn't go the way of the Clippy art where people get annoyed that it keeps popping up. But, what's a useful survey cycle might be your answer. So the earlier one, what's participation and when should you do it based on others? This one might be what's useful to you and your efforts. So to think about that, I think is a reasonable question from that information. The topical modules I mentioned in that last slide were new options that began in 2013, and we have continued to innovate around the options for these additional question sets. So they're very focused. They are about the topics that you see before you. There are now 11 of them, and we have a new option where you can actually design your own custom item set that we initiated just last year. And, these are interesting opportunities to gather more information. On the right-hand side, the other customization that was new beginning in 2013 was an open-ended survey prompt that you could elect. You could decide which of these questions you wanted to ask. And then again, we innovated a little bit and allowed you to design your own question a few years ago. So if there's a question that you always historically ask seniors, you could attach that to your NSSE administration. So those are a couple of customization options that I think are also interesting to study. And we've learned a lot. Cheyenne has been leading us in thinking about the topical module choices that institutions make, and specifically with USUs. In the bubbles here, the nice little bubble diagram are what institutions chose for the last couple years overall. So you can kind of get a sense of what's most popular based on the size of the bubble, but I included the numbers in here just to give you a sense of how many places we're talking about. By far, our most popular modules are advising, inclusiveness and engagement with cultural diversity and career workforce preparation. And, the other interesting question is, well, what have USU's elected over this time? Or I expanded the frame slightly to see over time, the longer period. And it's by far academic advising most popular, but what comes in next is first year experience and senior transition, really trying to better understand those bookend experiences. And then you can see the rest that come up. But I thought you might even want to see some of the choices that have been more recent, because I think they suggest some concern or some perhaps areas where there might be some joint interest or at least shared interest among institutions. And that's around academic advising. 6 elected this module in 23, 3 elected it in 24, and you can kind of see, and so on through these options. We did have a couple of modules that were on hiatus, so that explains the 0 for the writing, but then we offered it again when it was refreshed in 2024. So, just a little bit on this, and again, the pesky little thought bubble, do these module choices suggest some possible shared concerns and interests that might be it might be valuable to bring people together to say, how are you using your academic advising results? Or how are you using your career and workforce? Or to maybe put forward from a research-based perspective, what does students need in the urban serving sector around career and workforce preparation? Can we make a research-based claim about need for a grant proposal or for an initiative that might be strengthened by pooling data around some of these common interests? So I think there's some really interesting sector work that this might suggest. Again, I'm on a real customization line here, so I'm going to mine it to the last thing here, which is around the comparison group options. We have always allowed institutions to tailor their comparison groups. That's a real value, I think, of participating in a national project like NSSE. We have increased the options to tailor these in really specific ways. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I will provide these slides to Jennifer and everybody here afterwards. And this is all on our website. You can see the different ways to tailor it. But I just want to give you a couple of examples of some of the clever ways you have tailored them. So somebody in here created a group called Large Public 4 Years. There are 13 institutions that they elected to compare themselves to. Another institution in this group chose what they called I guess I got to get my Roman numerals, the Big 12 plus. 9 institutions chose that, and they have their list. Another institution chose Public UG greater than 20K. I mean, these are all your inventive names. So somebody chose this in your institution. This is just a sample of a couple of other creative names that your institutions elected, probably some self-explanatory: region, a state, Colorado Publics, New Jersey. Some aspirational. I like some of these comparisons where you can identify an aspirant group. And then these I just love because they were so, I mean, I almost wanted to get out the Enigma machine to decipher them here, what they represent. So, they can really be tailored. And I think this is an interesting, perhaps, conversation. How are people creating these groups and for what purposes? And, again, the pesky question mark there, if that didn't occur to you, it definitely occurred to me. So there might be some value to talk about that comparative aspect. The big issue that is probably on your minds, I'm sure, for any of you who have done NSSE and know one of the significant challenges is really increasing student participation. This is the trade-off. We are trying to assure that we are gathering student voice and that we want to represent student voice, but that's wholly dependent on students' participation. And, that is the challenge in this work. We have tried our darndest to try and figure out all the different ways that we can customize recruitment messages, create schedules that are responsive to institutional calendars, and events and creating thoughtful incentives, creating promotional, easy to use materials. We allowed institutions to create survey links and post them to portals or to a learning management system. This is all very recent. So if you have not done NSSE in the last 5 years, some of this stuff is brand new. So it's worth thinking about. Despite all these efforts, there's no denying a response rate of 17% is tough to deal with, and that has been declining over time, which is why we had to ramp up some of these customization of administration options. Even at 17%, though, we're talking a lot of students and power in the sheer numbers. I don't like to get hung up on percentage response rates. I think it is a false search. For social scientists in the room. You know how hard it is to talk about response rates and what that means. It's more about the count. I can go on that. I'm passionate about it. The other thing we've tried to chronicle is what types of incentives work and who's using them. So we have a treasure trove of information about the kinds of incentives that are effective and what we believe works and how many people are using that type of incentive. So I would again throw that back to you. How do you promote NSSE? What influences your students' participation? I think you've got a really interesting opportunity to learn more about what motivates urban serving urban serving institution students to complete a survey. It's not the same as a private liberal arts college. So let's think about that together. I think there could be an opportunity here. Okay, so here's a shift into, let's get into the data now. What are we learning about USU students from these data? I mentioned, 30,000, 39,000 students. Well, it's actually 39,778 USU students that are in 23 and 24, very recent data. This is a general profile, who they are in terms of full-time status. So you can see we probably got a lot more full-time students than you see on your own campuses, I suspect, but somebody tell me if that's, I would love to see your USU characteristics, Jennifer and Julia, alongside this to see how well this actually reflects what you believe your population of institutions represent. So a little bit about that we can look at. We can start to look even at some of their behaviors, which I think is even a more interesting way to describe who students are. In this case, 28% work for payoff campus 16 or more hours a week, and 13% cared for dependents 10 or more hours a week. So, there are lots of ways we can cut this and look at it in terms of who USU students are. And again, I would invite you to think about, are there other salient identities that we could look at? Are there other engagement types you think we could create? The part-time engaged student, the part-time involved student, what could that look like? And might we do a little examination around that? Now, I'm going to try and really tease you with some data here, just because I think it is important for you to be reminded about what the data represent, but I'm trying to tailor this really around some things that I think USU institutions are interested in. And, some of this information I gleaned from the meeting that Jennifer invited us to this summer, and also just continued conversations about how the sector is defined. And for me, there's a real value. We always need to know if students are satisfied. And while satisfaction is not a be all end all measure in any estimate, in anything I do, I do think it's worth asking. And it's really an important dimension of the student experience. Actually, USU students are pretty satisfied. If you look at excellent or good responses, these are pretty high. This is not lower than private liberal arts colleges. So, that's something interesting, is that this is not a less than experience at all. This is a satisfying experience for students. And for those of you who I've used old school device here to scratch off the name of the institution, but I wanted to show you a real example. This is an institution's data, that a USU member institution that has a satisfaction rate as this overall experience, excellent or good, that's about the same as the peers they selected for first years and exceeds the aspirant, or in this case, their peer group that they selected. It's a pretty big peer group for seniors. I think that's a story. That is an important story to tell. So I wouldn't let that go. So again, this is only one measure of quality. Again, I think you could look at the potential for studying variation in satisfaction across engagement. Are students who indicate that they are engaged with faculty or have a high quality relationship with peers, are they more satisfied than students that don't have that characteristic? So that might suggest to you where you might invest some effort in terms of educational practice. Another, so now I want to get into a couple of other things, and we'll see how much time I have to kind of go through these. I won't do quite as much detail as I just did. But again, I thought there were some topics that were really salient for USUs. And, here are my top 5 kind of topics that I thought were really interesting. And I'm going to just go through a couple of these just to, again, show you what I think either you as an institution might be able to mine, or again, where there might be some collective storytelling or an analysis to do. The first one is career planning experiences. I know that I heard many of you talk about your students being, purpose-driven, career-minded, that's an important dimension of their experience. And in this case, I just wanted to present the proportion of students who indicated that they spoke with a faculty member about their career plans at least sometimes. So it seems like a fair enough bar, at least somebody, they talked with somebody about this sometime as first year students. Now that does mean 25% of the students said never. So I don't want to ignore that group. So there's still some, I'd like to get more into that sometimes arena, but this is a pretty good number in terms of a first year. 54% of first year students reported that their institution contributed to their knowledge, skills, and personal development in acquiring work and job related knowledge and skills. Maybe you might want to look at that in variation between your students who indicate they're working full-time versus those who are not working full-time. So there might be some really interesting ways to study this a little bit more, both again as a sector or within your institution. And just to give you the other side of that, you can see the seniors much higher penetration. Obviously, you would expect this. 80% are talking with somebody about their career, faculty member about their career plans. 67% of seniors reporting that they've gained that work-related knowledge and skills. So a pretty good story here in terms of those kind of experiences. And, again, I would look to you to say, all right, well, what is the right threshold for these numbers? Do you want to see any students indicating never on this dimension, that they've never talked with a faculty about their career plans? So there could be thresholds at an institutional level. And then I think there could be ways to talk a little bit more about USU's emphasis on career and workforce. And that could be a really appealing way to present these data. Quality of interactions is one of those dimensions that we have known for a long time is one that directly relates to retention at big institutions. Quality of interactions among all people, whether those are students, faculty, administrative staff, is important, and it's harder to do. So yeah, I think it's a fair gauge of the overall environment at any institution, but particularly urban serving institutions. I just present on the left-hand side kind of where our first year students rate their experience. This is a pretty high bar of 6 or 7 on a 7-point scale. But I think it's fair to say, I suspect many of us would want these percentages to be higher. And, this kind of gives you where they are highest in students. But even that's not too much different than academic advisors. So, this is kind of interesting to look at. And I would bring us back to the great work that Peter Felton and Leo Lambert have done on relationship-rich education, and perhaps use this as an indicator for what you might be interested in doing on your own campus to dig into the practices that Peter and Leo really emphasize in their very accessible book around the value of relationships. I could see using these data to catalyze some initiatives around that concept. The third dimension is overall experiences of support. I think this pairs nicely with the quality of interaction dimension. And this one is really about students' perceptions about institutional emphasis. And in this case, I'm just representing a dichotomous, so I've combined very much and quite a bit around students' success academic first, their academic success, and then the second item is around overall well-being. And again, pretty decent proportions of students who indicate that they felt that level of support, again, might be a good news story to tell. And again, I think you could dig more into this. Are there certain student types or identities who feel more support from the institution that might warrant institutional action? And then again, could be another sector story. How might we deliver and gain more support for student groups of students or around certain concepts of institutional support for success? All right, high impact practices have been around for a while. We probably all know about them. Wildly popular, I think, are ways to make any institution better, but urban serving institutions have particular resource opportunities. I think, here's where I immediately think about potential for service learning, for doing internships. Here I'm just showing you what first year students are experiencing around 3 dimensions that are pretty reasonable for them to undertake in the first year. That research with faculty dimension is actually pretty high, which to me is really interesting and might be a good story to tell about urban research institutions. So that one's really interesting. And then I also think it's interesting to see what first year students indicate they plan to participate in. So this idea of expectations is an important thing to know something about. Your first year students at USUs are revealing a wide range of expectations. These are actually, I will say, pretty high. These are not, in fact, 2 of them are higher than at other private baccalaureate institutions. And if we were live and in an audience, I would make you guess what those 2 are. But I'll just tell you it's internships and research with faculty. So interesting that that's what your first year students expect to do. Now, the question about how did students get these expectations? Where are they coming from? What do we know about them? How do we then assure participation would be the questions that are on my mind when I see these kind of data. What can be done about them? And what do we do to influence them and in any way? Now, of course, you always want to know, okay, what does this result in? And while I'm not showing you here the exact tracking of first year students who have converted themselves into high impact practices, you could probably do that, but we don't have we don't do that kind of longitudinal work. However, cross-sectionally, I can tell you within the same institution, if we looked at an institution level of students who did that as seniors, but cross-sectionally across institutions, we can also see how many seniors actually do these things within USUs. So despite the fact that 72% of entering students wanted to do internships, we see that drop off here to about 51% actually achieving it. I mean, obviously, these are not apples to apples, but the idea, the concept is still there. Service learning is actually the one that's consistently good. So students expect to do it, and then they do it as seniors too. So that one's kind of interesting, and that could be facilitated within an urban environment as well. So interesting around high impact practice penetration around these, and to me, there's some real demonstration of mission here that could be trumpeted. Last dimension that I just want to highlight is civic mission. And I just chose, there are lots of ways to represent civic mission, but I think these 2 concepts from our reflective and integrative learning are a little bit more academic for me, and I love them. They don't know this, but they're my favorite items on the survey. The opportunities that students have to connect their learning to societal problems, I think, is a really interesting conception or a way students will get acquainted with a civic mission. So to me, knowing how many students get to experience this is a real function of teaching and learning and the broader context for how much we connect our urban environment or our community environment to our courses, and then connected ideas from courses to their prior experiences and knowledge is, I think, a way to honor and acknowledge the learning that and the knowledge base that I think many urban students bring to their education. So to me, this is an interesting one to reflect some unique components of urban serving institutions. So phew, that was a lot. I feel like I need to pause and take a sip of water and see if there are any questions too. And then I think we're moving into the last phase of this where we kind of think a little bit more collectively. Any questions or comments about this? Oh, I see Janet had a good question, but now I'm not sure when she put that in. All right, this is my time to have a sip of water.
Jillian, my question
Yeah.
was related to Jennifer's note about a USU module. But I did have a question for you about the comparison. You sort of allude to it throughout.
Yeah.
Just wondering if there's some way to see how our responses compare to other types of institutions.
Oh, I tried to stay away from it, but I can't resist it either. Yeah, there that is possible to do. And Jennifer and I had a really short, just the briefest conversations about perhaps identifying a relevant comparator group that might be useful. I think the challenge, Janet, and I would be interested to hear your and everybody's feedback on this is, what is that right group? Is it really baccalaureate liberal arts? Yeah, we could probably make a case, but is that really? I don't know. I don't know what the right comparator is. Do you have an idea?
Um, I have lots of comparators I would like to see. It depends on the topic, right? So
Yep.
if it's about student engagement with faculty research, I would love to compare ourselves to, research institutions of all types, not
Mhm.
just urban serving, right? Um,
Yeah.
if it's about, campus level engagement or high impact practices, I would love to see how we compare to, private liberal arts colleges. I think you're right that we don't want to get into that sort of comparison game, but it's hard to make sense of the numbers
Yeah.
without knowing what the context is.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Respect that. Yep. Good. I'll just say, if anybody else wants to open their mic, please go ahead and ask. The other thing that occurs to me in that conversation is, I think the what do the numbers mean? Like, the slide that I'm showing right now, what do these numbers mean, in relation to what is obviously a perfectly reasonable question. But I think there could be some really interesting opportunities to say, as a sector, we expect this to be 70%. Like, is there a way to maybe set some threshold that are informed by your mission, by a teaching and learning initiative around these efforts? So there could be some really interesting ways to set some thresholds among the USUs. That's you're setting your own benchmarks. Heck, we don't need the comparisons if we set our own benchmarks. All right, does anybody want to take me up on that? I was really throwing it out there. All right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna just try and wrap us here and hope that we can get off the slides and then maybe have a little bit more conversation. So I'm kind of taking this in two tacks. One is, I hope that we can be more helpful to the USU sector, the institutions individually, to help you use your data more effectively to assess students' experience and inform change, or if you're trying to demonstrate an accreditation or to really do some mission strategic planning, that I think these are all the places I would start to insert your results, or as we were just kind of starting to dig in around what the sector can learn. There are common challenges that maybe we could address together. No shortage of the need to increase student participation. Is there a value to doing a more widespread challenge grant for institutions to increase student participation, or maybe some ideas around, that incentive worked for us really well, maybe other people could adopt it. The expanding dissemination of results, how do you do that within your particular sector? Does it mean a data team? Is that the right strategy? I don't know if anybody from UTSA is on, but they've had a lot of success with data teams. Should that be a strategy that might be deployed more across USUs, or I would probably argue lots of places. Maybe there's some ways to come together around deepening analyses, or here's what worked when we did analysis, or here's something that we studied. I think there are lots of ways to think about even tracking the use of results to inform change initiatives. And then the big one for me is telling this data informed story, both at an institutional level and as a sector. And that's probably where I would take us next, is to think about, are there opportunities to really think more collaboratively across USU institutions to exchange ideas at the very least? I mean, that to me seems like a nice invitation, but there could be some deeper work that could really get at how do we lift up our students' voice in this sector? It's a way to honor that. I didn't even touch the open-ended comments. There's a lot in there that when I just glanced at it, that talks very specifically about being a student at an urban institution. You can see it in their comments. So I think there's a lot more to think about around this. And, there are certainly some ways to try and maybe look at the way the sector has grown with that historical data you have too. If there's something that you think, we really did some greater work around undergraduate research in the early 2000s, let's take a look at the data before that and after that and see if we can detect any difference in our results. So you could do that at your institution, or it could be done among institutions that took advantage of such an initiative. It's a small enough group. I think your story. I think you have a story to tell. And I think it really could be quite effective. So I'll just leave it with that encouragement, and then maybe just a reminder that if you at all were thinking about registration, I don't want to pass up an opportunity to say NSSE registration is happening through the end of this month. So don't miss it if it was on your agenda. So let me stop there and see if there's perhaps some ideas that this, maybe if Jennifer, if you want to wrap us up, or
I think I would like, first of all, I want to thank you. I was struggling with the mute button there. Sorry. I do want to pursue the idea of like how urban and serving is, how you all are using these data now in ways that are unique to being urban serving. So Janet, you talked a little bit about it, but others, we called out some of the University of Texas schools. I know that UT Arlington is repped here pretty hard. How are you using these in ways that are meaningful to the identity of urban serving? Because we would like, as the coalition, to be leading that charge for you. But I also realize that you're probably already doing some of this. So can I ask some of you to share maybe how you're using these data in ways that are meaningful to that identity?
you've asked the $1,000 question, Jennifer.
I know. And if the answer is we are not, that's information for us too, because then that gives us something to address.
Yeah. Oh, there she is.
Is there a raised hand? Or
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
okay.
Are we allowed to call?
Sorry.
I think so. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Sergio from Fresno State. Hey, Jillian, how you doing?
Hi.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that wonderful presentation. I don't think we've really leveraged it for really understanding our role as an urban serving institution at Fresno State. I don't think we've done a good job of leveraging the data at all. We've sort of collected it, stored it, and said, okay, we did it. Maybe there's been one or two presentations about past ones, but we haven't done it. What I'd really like to see next is, I think somebody also mentioned going back to my IR team and saying, can they do a longitudinal presentation of any changes that they may notice from our first time administering this through now, and because we just did it in 2024. But I would really like to be able to use, but the common complaint is there are never enough responses, right? So I don't know what we do with that, because you're saying it's
Yeah.
not, or the percentage is always low, but they're using the percentage and not necessarily
Yeah.
numbers. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, where you were saying that it's not necessarily the percentage that's important, but the number.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will never shy away or relent on we always need to increase student participation. I will not shy away from that. The other thing that we need to, I think, better represent as scholars and people working in institutional research is use the numbers and the counts that we have more effectively than just dismissing low counts. Now, I will always say that we need to make sure that at the same time we don't dismiss counts, that we also look at representativeness. So, I know I'm increasing the order here of what needs to happen in order to make the data useful, but I think all of those things are important. But the count information, we have been analyzing this for years, that you can have reliable estimates based on lower numbers than I think a typical response rate would imply. And we all feel more comfortable. Oh, 50%, that sounds great. I can trust that. But that's way more data than you need to make good estimates. It's probably not enough data if you really want to get into by major or program area. I mean, that's where you're going to get thwarted right away. But you can say some things with with reasonable confidence and get some insights that you wouldn't have, or that you can at least pair with other data to try and say something with greater confidence. So, I mean, there's a lot I can say, Sergio, and we have some resources on our website that I will not be fast enough to access to get to you, but that could be another opportunity, is maybe bring together some IR folks or others who might be curious about this together to talk about, what is a reasonable response rate, what are reasonable counts, how do we use this, how do we deal with skeptics who are rightly concerned about that, and how those data will be used.
Yeah, I do. I think that would be a useful sort of conversation to have, as to what sort of conclusions or analyses would be justified with a lower response rate than 50%, right?
Yeah,
Thank you.
yep. Okay, I'm very happy to see Terry Hall on this with a hand up. Was that a fake
Yep.
hand up?
No, that was me. Jillian, I'm sorry, I can't get my camera to work because I was so looking forward to getting to make eye contact with you, but I'm sorry. So one of the things that since coming to Wichita State, I've been here for 8 years now, is that my whole understanding of engagement has changed. That I came here with a understanding of what engagement is from a more traditional sense, right? In the classroom, in organization, that students' life was really on campus. But what I found here, that because applied learning is really our thing, for example, we know that we had 9,000 students earn $30 million in applied learning experiences last year. And I say that a little bit to brag, yes. Yeah. But beyond that, but as I talk to alums, their level of connection and feeling of affinity for Wichita State were just as great as the students that I would have met from more traditional engagement paths on campus. And so I throw this out as, when we think about urban serving institutions, I would assume my colleagues also have an emphasis on interacting in the city and the great places for internships and jobs and all those other kinds of things that I think makes us certainly very different than rural institutions that can't offer those kind of things. But that students are really proud of their experiences from Wichita State. And it's been fascinating to think differently about what engagement means. So I throw it out as a comment to you.
Really, really nice idea too, is, I think what your comment strikes me with is there could be a way to really attach some data to that definition of
Right.
what is an engaged student at an urban serving university?
Yep.
What does that look like? And then
Right.
you're not only norming that, but you're also really setting a context for the kinds of engagement
Yep.
you want. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Nice. It's nice to see you, Jillian.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you. Well,
Jillian, I was compelled by having done a lot of work in high impact practices in different domains. I was compelled by the types of high impact practices that you saw. And again, you didn't necessarily, as Janet said, do a comparison, but you called out and said these are really good numbers, and they sort of make sense at urban serving universities in the sense of like internships and service learning. And I think the one that I want you could hopefully you could unpack more is the research engagement, because that was a pretty sizable number as well. And I think sometimes we talk about being urban serving, but we forget the research part, right? We're urban serving research universities, and that is also a unique part of our identity. So I didn't know if you could speak to that a little bit more, because those high impact practices and what they might mean for us as definitional elements of USUs.
yeah, the research one in the first year was surprised me, and that's, that would suggest that there not only are perhaps some programs that are going on pretty early on to engage students. So there's that. The expectation is higher than what I saw at other, I do tend to dwell on these data a lot. So I can say that it's higher than at some private small liberal arts colleges who really claim that strong research, like you get to do undergraduate research here. So I think there's something about students' expectations that might be really important to look into here at these institutions, because the flip side of that is unmet expectations are not good. So, so when students come in expecting to do something like undergraduate research and then they don't, what does that do to them at an urban serving research university? Maybe that's more deflating there. So I would, that might be something to examine within institutions. But the other thing is the strength that exists in the seniors. It's, the average is 24% and you're exceeding it. So, that right there says a lot.
So those expectations to participate can almost be interpreted as momentum that we can work from.
That's a nice framing.
And in some ways, I'm thinking of David Kalsbeek's 4 Ps, like what is our promise to those students as an urban serving institution? And it seems like the students are perceiving a promise of some type of research engagement. And so we need to think about how we can do that from an urban serving perspective.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I like the Kalsbeek idea of thinking about it from an enrollment management idea too. Yeah, yeah. All right, I know I really tossed a lot out at you. It was super fun to dig in, and I just want to thank Kristen and Cheyenne, and I see Jayla's on too, for helping get into this. And we're moving ahead. So I hope you're going to be with us on this. In some ways, we won't say anything without you, of course, but we're so into it now that we have had an occasion to really get to know this sector. As I said at the beginning, it's not one that I had thought much about before, which is an embarrassment to me when I think about myself as an urban research university student. So really important in this way. So I really hope we can do something.
Well, the commitment is twofold. It is mutual. And I'm very excited to see as many IR folks and NSSE reps as I've seen, like presidents and, USU members. I think this is a great opportunity to build those relationships on campus as well toward better use of these data. And USU, I'm speaking for our team, would like to be building opportunities for us to do aggregates of these data, to do more of these kinds of analyses, and to speak on behalf of the sector and the successes of the students and high impact practices and experiences that you're offering in this sector. So yeah, I will say publicly, we're here to do that. Logistically, folks, this has been recorded. We will find a place to post it so you can get to it and have access to it. The slides will similarly, we'll find a home for them and be in touch with you about how you can access them. So this is all meant to be continued resources to you and your work and to our USU folks. So if there's somebody that you plan to be here or you really think would benefit from this that just wasn't able to make this time work, please feel free to forward, this information. We will be in follow-up mode with you on that. And we, as you guys participate in NSSE, let us know, because we do want to make the most of those data for all of you and all the member institutions. Sorry, Jillian, please go
And
ahead.
I was just going to say that, that for me, the appeal here is really always that if there's a question that you have or an idea, please reach out and ask us, or tell us there's a problem with X, Y, and Z. We try and be responsive. And we're really interested in engaging with you about these ideas. So please reach out and let us know how we can help.
Well, sincere thanks to Jillian and Cheyenne and Kristen and Jayla and all of our NSSE folks and all of you for participating. Thank you to Julia and the USU team for setting this up. And we are pleased to have you here, and we look forward to having you in future webinars. So thanks so much. Hope to see many of you at the APLU annual meeting next month.